This is a lot more fun than Ruby Foos, isn't it?
Yes, it's pretty.
It's not going to take a long time to do an introduction because we all know who Paul Weston is. If we didn't know this morning, we certainly know now. And so we are very proud to have Paul Weston here in Montreal speaking to us. So come and depress us. It's entirely up to you.
This is such a peculiar thing. Listen, thank you very much, all of you, for coming out here tonight. And I know that many of you have said that you're ashamed of what's going on, and it is a shameful thing. But if you talk about Islam, these are the sort of things that happen. And Valerie earlier on was talking about Robert Spencer when he came here. And I came over here with Jack Bugby, and we both found that when we took out our suitcases earlier to put our best clothes on for the speaking, that the security people, the customs people, had gone through both of our suitcases. And it reminded me of something Valerie said in the car earlier today with Robert Spencer. And they said, they searched it, and they said, "Do you have any hateful literature in here?" And Robert said, "Well, only the Quran."
He didn't know what he was talking about, but it's okay.
It's important that we understand that what's happening now is not just the immediate future. It's the distant future that we have to be concerned about. And I knew my grandfather. My grandfather was born in 1886, something like this. And I actually knew him when I was a child. And he lived through the most amazing technological differences. Now, they had no aeroplanes, no cars, no telephones. His era lived through this amazing era. And we are going to live through a similar era this time. If I had a grandchild born today, that child is going to be living at the end of this century, the beginning of the next century. And we are going to see the most enormous changes by the time that happens. And it's this thing that's like the illusion of permanency. You can have... Tomorrow will be the same as today, next week will be the same as this week, and the month after that will be the same as this month. But when you start looking in decades, you suddenly start having a completely different outlook. And by 2026, Europe is going to be a considerably different country. By 2036, it's going to be either involved in some sort of terrible civil war, or it's going to be taken by people like, hopefully, by Geert Wilders and Marine Le Pen. But, the next 10, 20, 30 years will be nothing like the last 60 years in Europe. And this is driven purely by the demographic growth. But Islam and mass migration is not really the actual disease. The disease is political correctness, which has allowed Islam to come in, forced us to say nothing about it. And political correctness, there's a guy called Tim Stanley who writes for the Daily Telegraph in London. And he wrote something the other day saying, PC is really about making people be polite to each other. This guy's a doctor, he really should know better. But a friend of mine came back from Germany recently, and he was involved in the whole Cologne situation with the sexual assaults on hundreds and hundreds of girls that night. And he works for the embassy. He came back and he said, "Do I really shouldn't say this, but in actual fact, it is true what is being said about it. But please don't say that I told you this because I work for the embassy and it's worth more than my job." So political correctness is the thing that is standing between us today and us being able to do anything about Islam tomorrow. If we can't talk about it and we can't criticise it, and someone here earlier was talking about this new Bill 59, which I'd never heard of before, which obviously is being driven by the order of the Islamic Conference, which again is coming down to enforcing blasphemy laws. We have this already in Britain, but we've just come up from America. They can still pretty much say what they want. But obviously Canada's got this coming as well. And we shouldn't think that political correctness is something that only really started fairly recently. People say it really started in the 1980s. If you look in the closing passage of the Communist Manifesto, written, I think, in 1848, and just before it closes with "Workers of the world, unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains." And the paragraph before that says, "The Communist Party everywhere backs every revolutionary movement that stands against the existing social and political order." And that essentially is what political correctness is. It is designed to subvert and destroy and undermine the foundations of Western Europe. They love Islam, of course, because Islam is the ultimate antipathy to Western civilization, which is why they are so keen, the left are so keen. Left-wingery is supposed to be an economic theory. It is not supposed to be about pushing loads of people from the Middle East, the Far East, into your countries in order to subvert them. And it's being done deliberately. And really, I go back to the Communist Manifesto about this, but then after the First World War, it was generally accepted by the socialists and the communists at the time that they were going to have their revolution all across Europe. After the 1917 Russian Revolution, they thought this would continue. And they even thought that the men would stop fighting on the Western Front, because the working man will not fight another country's working man, and they must fight instead for the class interests. And it never happened, and the slaughter continued, and then obviously the Versailles Treaty then led to the Second World War, and the working class man again found himself fighting with foreign working class men. And there was a Italian communist called Antonio Gramsci, I think if I pronounce it correctly, who talked about changing the cultural hegemony of Europe, of Western civilization. And the way he wanted to do this was to basically carry out what they called at the time critical theory, which was to denounce every aspect of Western civilization, whether it's Christianity, capitalism, the family, patriarchy, you name it, that was under the cosh. This was something that... and Gramsci really came up with this because he thought that only by dissolving the very foundations could they then go on to bring about their glorious revolution. And after Gramsci came out of Germany after the Second World War, he was Italian, but he was over there, and they had a guy called Georgi Lukács and Herbert Marcuse. And between Marcuse, Lukács and Gramsci, you have what ended up eventually in the 1960s, 1968, students on the campuses all around the Western world, all at the same time, all saying the same thing. And Marcuse was so elevated and exalted in the left-wing world that they used to chant Marx, Mao, Marcuse. He was that influential. And Lukács said that only by overturning all the existing traditional social and economic structures of the West can we bring about our revolution. And he was parroting one more man I'll mention from that day is a chap called Charles Reich. And what he said was that there is a revolution coming. It will not be carried out by violence. It cannot be resisted by violence. It is the revolution of the new generation. And he's talking explicitly about political correctness. So political correctness, if we cannot destroy completely political correctness, we will never be able to do anything about Islam. And it's as simple as that. All across the Western world, we are looking at more and more what they call political correctness, but more and more enforcement of Sharia blasphemy laws, more and more people speaking out and being put in prison and jailed and terrorized. Tommy Robinson, my fellow Englishman, who I don't know if anyone here has read his book, but if not, they should put it on their list, Enemy of the State. And this book describes what the police, the justice departments and the politicians and the media have done to this man, and it is quite horrific. They literally tried to kill him because he was speaking, excuse me, out about the very real situation in Britain. And he's been prosecuted, hounded almost to madness, and attacked within prison because they put him in with Muslim inmates deliberately. So I'm sort of veering off topic there, but you know, unless we can overturn this whole PC establishment, and by that I mean the educational establishment, the media, the civil service, the police, because every single one of these institutions has suffered the long march from the 1960s, going all the way back to the Communist Manifesto, the long march through the institutions in order for them to subvert and destroy the West. So I don't know how you do it. It took them 60 years to do it. We don't have 60 years to quietly, politely elbow these people out of all the positions they now hold. We can't do it. And I don't know what you do if you can't do that, because we don't have 60 years left in order for us to do anything about Islam. We're looking at, you know, the demographics of Islam are terrifying. We've got, I think, if you include some of the Muslim areas like Albania in Europe, you've got 50 million, but we've got 25, 30 million already in Western Europe proper. And you look at a country like Germany at the moment, they took 1 million migrants in last year, refugees supposedly, although Europol have now said that they're not refugees, or 20% are. 80% of them are not from Syria at all. They're from Eritrea and Somalia and places like this, and 80% of them are aged 18 years of age to 30, which is fighting age if you're male and breeding age if you're female. The females aren't there yet. But 1 million last year, 500,000 this year, 1.5 million in total, and they are estimated they will be bringing in 3 to 4 family reunification members. And I don't think they will be bringing in grandpa and grandma. I think they'll be bringing in 2, 3 wives into Germany, and within another, well, by the end of this year, essentially, you will be looking at maybe 6, 7 million young Muslims in Germany. And the demographic in Germany of native Germans aged, I think, 18 to 30 is around about 15 million. So in 1 year and a half, you have already brought into that country half of your 18 to 30 year age group. And the trouble there is that German women, 30% of German women over the age of 40 are childless. 40% of German women with degrees over the age of 40 are childless. So their demographic is going to be, essentially we are depopulating all across Europe, but Germany is going quite quickly now. So you're going to see within one generation, and not one of our generations when we have children in our 30s and 40s, they're having 4 children by the time they're 21 years of age. So not only do they have more children, they have them far quicker than we do. So Germany is looking at a very serious Islamic problem within the next 10 years. And in Britain, we've now got 3 million Muslims, officially. I think the figure is probably closer to 4 million. And to be honest, nobody really knows. The Tessa Jowell, one of the awful Labour people years ago, was asked about it, and she said, to be honest, she said, we have no idea how many people come in and how many people go out. We simply don't know. Some of the supermarket chains in Britain are saying that based on food produce, they think that the population of Britain is not 63 million, it's pushing 80 million. And we simply don't know what these numbers are. But one thing that we do know is that when they first started coming in, and this is going back to this illusion of permanence again, about how small changes over long periods of time really do change countries, is when 200,000 people become 400,000 people, it isn't such a huge situation in a country the size of England. But today, and again, when the 400 become 800, it still isn't that bad. But now we're looking at 3 to 4 million. In 10 years' time, there will be 6 to 8 million. And then 12 to 16 million. And by the time you get to 2050, you're looking at 25, 30 million. And they are all of a certain age. You know, their demographic is, most of them are under the age of 15. Most of us are over the age of 55. Mark Stein says, the future belongs to those who can be bothered to turn up for it. And at the moment, we're not turning up for it, they're turning up for it. And we are still bringing them into the country, which is a quite extraordinary thing. And these politicians who are saying, you know, Europol has come out and said that they think 5,000 jihadists are now in Europe. When these 500,000 more come in next year to Germany, there will be more thousands of jihadists coming to Europe. So when they do what they will inevitably end up doing, which will be a Paris-style attack or a London-style attack, Western politicians will have the blood on their hands. And you can't tell them this. You know, I have said this publicly to them. It makes no difference at all. They are quite prepared to sacrifice our people in order to do the politically correct thing today. And the higher up the PC chain you go, the more they become politically correct, because I think probably because they're earning a lot of money by the time they get there, and they cannot afford to lose their jobs. So when we had the tube bombings in 2005 in London, Sir Ian Blair, the police commissioner, after the terrible carnage, said, Islam and terrorism are two words that do not go together. His second in command said the same thing. When we had that poor Lee Rigby run down and badly injured, the cowardly way they did it, they didn't just attack him, they had to use a car to do it. 2 Nigerian Muslims. And they ran him down and then they proceeded to decapitate him on the street. And they were waving the Quran, they were shouting verses from the Quran. Allah has ordered us to do this because we were in their foreign countries waging war against them. It's all there in the Quran. And after that, David Cameron said, this is a perversion of Islam, this has nothing to do with Islam. It has everything to do with Islam. No Western politician, no Western media person has ever said anything truthful about Muhammad. Why were they decapitating him? They were decapitating him because it's in the Quran and it's what Muhammad did. And you cannot get this into the media. If all the people in Western Europe, in the Western world, actually understood what Islam was, we would no longer have a problem. But they are going to lie to us and lie to us and lie to us until eventually we either reach civil war or we can do, demographically, we can just do nothing about it. And as I say, the higher up the chain you go, the worse it gets. So I don't know what you do about that either. You know, I'm thinking that you have to have some sort of counter-cultural revolution. But how do you do that? I mean, does it start here in this room? Does it start on a street in London? Where's it going to start? At the moment, this is a very civilized, genteel gathering. But I don't know how we're going to do it. I think it's going to end up where we try to say what we try to say, we continue doing these sort of things, but unfortunately it doesn't get us very far, and in 10 years, 20 years, at the absolute maximum, I think that Europe is going to descend into a situation like Yugoslavia in the 1990s, that, as everybody understands, you know, split along racial and religious fault lines. And the racial and religious fault lines are there to see all across the Western world today when it comes to Islam. And if you try to say anything about it, you are a racist, fascist, xenophobic, Islamophobe. Islamophobia, by the way, I'm sure you all know this, but Islam means submission. A phobia is an irrational fear. Do we really have an irrational fear of submission? I have a very rational fear of submission. I really do. But we're not going to submit. You know, we're going to keep on doing what we're doing, despite everything against us. Our politicians are against us, our media is against us, our educational establishments are against us, the judiciary is against us, the police are against us. But we still have to fight. And as I said earlier in this, we can't take the fight to Islam. I think we will have to in 10, 20 years' time, physically, but we cannot take the fight to Islam now until we overturn the new cultural establishment, which effectively makes all of us counter-revolutionaries. And it's a genteel setting, but unless you can start thinking of yourselves as counter-revolutionaries and getting in there and getting into these institutions and making your voices heard and doing something about it and exposing the people at the top, then we are not going to change it. So that really is my message today to you, is that if we do not want civil war in the Western world, we must all become counter-revolutionaries today, and we must overturn the politically correct establishment.